Welcome to the channel. Today's story isn't just about rules. It's about power, betrayal, and the kind of quiet revenge that leaves a mark. You won't believe what this HOA tried to pull or how it all came crashing down. I'm Mia, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because, trust me, these stories only get crazier. Now let's get started. The morning sunlight sliced across the dew-soaked lawns of Willow Creek, making each blade of grass sparkle beneath the feet of early joggers and the mechanical hum of lawnmowers. On Maple Drive, where pastel shutters glowed in tidy rows and mailboxes gleamed like rows of soldiers, Alan Fisher stood on his porch, mug in hand, searching for a sense of peace that never seemed to last beyond the first sip. He'd bought this house just 4 years ago, freshly divorced and raw, a man trying to rebuild. The shingles were a little outdated, sure. The trim needed love, but it was his, a place to gather himself, to grow back into his skin. His daughter, Emily, called it Dad's little castle. But castles need sanctuaries, and lately, Alan noticed cracks forming in the stone. He watched a familiar silver Prius roll slowly past his driveway. The driver's eyes, sharp behind thick-framed glasses, lingered a second too long. That was Mrs. Stark, HOA board president, clipboard always on the passenger seat. Alan's gaze darted to the side yard, his heart thumping. There, the bag of mulch he had had no time to spread, the garden hose coiled unevenly, a forgotten plastic toy lying just out of sight. He cursed under his breath and shifted, failing to look casual. Every time he caught Mrs. Stark patrolling, Alan felt himself shrink, like a child being measured for infractions. A sudden memory flashed, his finger painting from Emily taped to the garage last week. Had he taken it down? The HOA banned unauthorized signage. Even a splash of childish joy was suspect here. The rules, Alan thought, the endless rules. He'd read the HOA handbook twice, cover to cover, still half expecting someone in uniform to ring his doorbell and demand compliance for a smudge on the siding. A breeze carried the scent of cut grass and something underneath, just a hint of unease that never left Willow Creek, not really. He sipped his coffee, the warmth fading faster than usual. From inside came Emily's laugh, a burst of real life. She was 9, all knees and elbows and tangled brown hair. She tumbled out with a bright purple backpack, her crooked tooth emerging when she grinned. Dad, did you remember it's muffin day at school? Alan's stomach dropped. Had he baked muffins? Bought them? He glanced at the microwave, then the calendar by the fridge, where a string of colorful magnets held a mess of appointments and official HOA letters. One envelope, unopened, stared at him accusingly. He knew that stationery, the kind with embossed letterhead, as if authority could be printed in gold ink. Alan ruffled Emily's hair. Of course I did, Munchkin. He grabbed his car keys and shoved the unopened letter into his jacket pocket, a weight that pinched. On the drive to school, Willow Creek revealed microcosms of order, from the calculated symmetry of front yards to the color-matched trash bins lining the curbs. Alan dropped Emily off, her hand slipping from his as she raced toward the swirl of children crowding the walkway. That's Mr. Fisher, he heard one woman whisper as she herded toddlers onto the crosswalk. He's always getting warnings, another voice murmured. Alan's jaw tightened. He didn't turn around. Instead, he returned home, the air in his car thick with worry and the scent of blueberry muffins. Store-bought, labeled in haste. He parked and stared at the envelope, fingers tracing the precise, professional fold. With each breath, anxiety gathered in his stomach, swirling and heavy. He tried to tell himself it was nothing important, maybe a newsletter, maybe last month's dues. But deep inside he knew. This was Willow Creek. They never let things slide. As he unlocked the front door, his phone vibrated, an unknown number, no message. He hesitated, then let it ring. Inside, he dropped his keys in the dish, standing there while dust motes spun in the shafts of sunlight. Only then did Alan rip open the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter once, then again, as a cold knot twisted in his chest. It wasn't a newsletter, it was a formal notice of noncompliance. Violation, improper storage of yard tools, and more ominously, unauthorized exterior decoration. That painting, Emily's painting. A $75.00 fine, payable within 10 days. 3 violations in 12 months meant a board hearing, possible legal action. Alan's hand shook as he set down the letter. He looked at the wall where the picture had hung, a smear of blue and yellow beneath the sun. When your child's joy is unauthorized decoration, where does defiance end and decency begin? Read the signature Lila Stark, HOA president. Suddenly, everything outside, every tidy bush and clipped hedge, looked like part of a plan to squeeze every bit of comfort from his home, one rule at a time. Alan's phone buzzed again, rattling against the countertop. He snatched it up, heart pounding. A text appeared, Mr. Fisher, please check your mailbox. Sincerely, Mrs. Stark. Alan's grip tightened around the phone. Looking out the front window, he could have sworn he saw that silver Prius parked 2 houses down. Was someone watching right now? A strange chill filled the sunlit kitchen, the sound of Emily's laughter already fading from the walls. He clenched the letter until his knuckles whitened. Outside, the clouds shifted and the world seemed to tilt. What would his next move be, and what exactly had Mrs. Stark just left in his mailbox? Alan opened the door, the bracing late spring air hitting him like a gentle warning. He stepped off the porch, each stride stiff and wary. His mailbox, a sturdy black box mounted on a cedar post installed 2 months after he moved in, had never felt so foreboding. He reached in, careful fingers trembling. Under a credit card offer and a flyer for discounted gutter cleaning, Alan found a crisp white envelope. Same embossed letterhead, heavier than before. The return address in ornate font, Willow Creek Homeowners Association, 202 11 Willow Avenue. He glanced down the street again. The Prius was gone, but the echo of Mrs. Stark's presence lingered. He could almost swear he felt eyes on him, though every window stared blandly ahead, curtains unmoving. A neighbor across the way raked his lawn with brusque, efficient movements, never making eye contact. No one did. Not here. Not when an official letter was in hand. Inside, Alan sliced the envelope with a butter knife, careful as a surgeon. This time, the letter felt colder, something in the wording precise and sharp. He read, Dear Mr. Fisher, this is your second notification regarding unauthorized modifications to your property. Please be advised that repeated noncompliance may result in further penalties as outlined in Section 7, subsection C of your homeowner agreement. You are required to attend the next HOA board meeting as a result of your violations. Failure to attend will be interpreted as a waiver of your right to appeal. Attendance is mandatory. Sincerely, Lila Stark, President. Alan's pulse buzzed beneath his skin. Attendance was mandatory. The last meeting he'd attended over a year ago was a study in awkward silences and measured glances, every chair filled by neighbors who never quite looked one another in the eye. He remembered the scraping of folding chairs, the folding of arms, the always too warm rec room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old carpet. He tried to swallow. This wasn't about a child's painting or a bag of mulch. It was about something else, something he couldn't quite see. Why such insistence over minor details? Why so much effort over him, Alan Fisher? In the kitchen, the clock ticked to 11. He set the letter on the table next to the first one, side by side like matched threats. Alan paced. The walls felt closer. His phone beeped, displaying a calendar alert for next Thursday. HOA meeting, 7 p.m., community rec room. Convenient, he thought. Automatic, like the decision already made. He glanced at the pile of compliance warnings he'd tucked in a drawer. Trash bins left on curb after 10 a.m. Grass exceeded regulation height. Unapproved mailbox color, black, not regulation green. He'd painted it black because green clashed with the door. A triviality, he'd thought. Apparently not. His thoughts reeled. He remembered how quickly isolation had set in after the divorce. Willow Creek was supposed to offer community. Instead, it enforced distance. Outside, his neighbor, Mr. Klein, passed, pulling his wheeled trash can to the curb. Alan saw Klein hesitate, catch his eye just long enough to offer a small, nervous nod before hurrying away. Everyone here acted as if being seen talking to Alan was dangerous. He sat at the edge of his couch, head in hands, the unpaid bills and the HOA notices forming a sad paper dam around him. Was it always this way? Or was it about him specifically? Were others hounded for every minor infraction? He texted Emily's mom just to feel normal. Muffin day went fine. She wore the green dress. No answer. A clatter from outside made him jump. It was only the wind tossing the garden rake, but his nerves snapped tight. Alan scrolled through his phone's browser, searching Willow Creek HOA. He found the official website, glossy, full of photos of happy families and block parties that felt staged. Regulations were tucked away in dense PDFs. His name appeared nowhere, not even among notes from previous meetings. He noticed a link, Violation Reports, Q1 2020 XTEX. He clicked through pages and pages of minor issues, lawn ornament unapproved, holiday lights removal delay, yet many names repeated, always the same two or three. A pattern? Something was off, and Alan couldn't let it go. The day stretched. He picked up Emily, watched her chat about social studies, the paint on her knuckles, smudged but proud. He nearly asked her if Mrs. Stark ever spoke to other kids' parents, but thought better of it. No sense in dragging her into adult worry. At home, late afternoon, Alan's phone buzzed yet again with a new email notification from Willow Creek Way Board. Subject, confirmation of attendance. Please confirm your attendance for Thursday's meeting. Non-response will be considered non-compliance as per Section 12. Uniform action will be taken. Uniform action. The words bit into him. He tapped out a reply, I will attend, and pressed send with a sense of resignation he couldn't shake. What was uniform action, anyway? As the sun dipped behind the houses, washing everything in golden light, Alan felt no joy at the beauty creeping in through the windows. The world looked perfect here, yes, but it was all a facade. He pulled back the curtain, watching light fade from the mailboxes that were all the same, except one small difference, his own, stubbornly black against the green sea. My questions churned. Why now? Why him? What was this meeting really about? He closed the blinds, shut out the view of perfect lawns, and waited for Thursday to arrive. But beneath it all, something new began to coil, an idea, half-formed and dangerous, that maybe, just maybe, he had more power than he realized. And if so, what would he do with it? Thursday arrived, cloaked in damp, overcast gray that pressed the sky low and made the streets shine slick and uncertain. Alan ironed his only decent shirt, the one reserved for job interviews and court dates, both things he'd hoped were behind him. Emily watched cartoons in the living room, her laughter distant and small. Alan caught his reflection, dark circles under his eyes, the permanent worry lines deepening. You look sad, Dad, Emily said as he grabbed his keys, straightening out his collar. He forced a smile. Just grown-up stuff, Emmy. Be good for Mrs. Collins, okay? He hugged her fiercely, promising he'd be back before bed. He wanted to believe that he'd come home unchanged. He arrived at the community rec room early. Rows of identical folding chairs sat backed against hardwood, too clean to be welcoming. A table up front hosted a line of black binders, each stamped with the HOA logo. In the center, Mrs. Stark looked up from her laptop, smile brittle and exact. Two other board members flanked her, Mr. Dalka, who wore a suit a size too tight, and Mrs. Taylor, known in Willow Creek for her annual Halloween display. Always within code, of course. Alan nodded, taking the last row. He felt every eye on him, though few met his directly. One by one, other homeowners shuffled in, clutching folders or whispered worries. He recognized Mrs. Lee from across the street. Her mouth tightened in sympathy, but as she took her seat, she didn't look back at him. At 7:05, Mrs. Stark stood, rapping her pen against her notebook. Welcome to order. Tonight we address ongoing property compliance issues, specifically related to non-conforming exterior decorations, yard maintenance, and mailbox color. Mr. Fisher, would you please come forward? Ellen's throat closed. He stood, hands flexing at his sides, and walked to the board's table, the eyes of the neighborhood burning holes in his back. Mrs. Stark's voice was clinical, rehearsed. Mr. Fisher, you have received multiple notifications regarding noncompliance, yard tools, sidewalk debris, unauthorized signage, mailbox color. This is your third violation in 12 months. Do you have anything to say before we proceed? Alan wanted to argue about priorities, to rage against the petty tyranny. Instead, his voice was steady. I bought that mailbox after the old one was smashed. The painting was from my daughter. The hose was 2 feet off the path, not blocking anything. Mrs. Stark didn't blink. We understand, but community standards must be upheld for everyone's benefit. The rules are very clear. This pattern of disregard is concerning to the board. Mr. Dalcott cleared his throat. Other residents have concerns. They feel your actions undermine neighborhood value and cohesion. Alan felt a flush in his cheeks, anger peaking and then folding in on itself. From the back, someone coughed, deliberate, a small voice of protest gone still. Alan scanned for an ally. No one stood up. Mrs. Taylor raised her hand, smiling thinly. Procedurally, we must remind you, 3 violations triggers a formal hearing and possible legal enforcement, as outlined in our charter. Alan swallowed. What does that mean? I can't decorate for holidays. I can't let my kid put up her art. Mrs. Stark's smile hardened. We'll review your case and issue a resolution next week. This isn't personal, Mr. Fisher. It's about maintaining order. Her words hung in the air. Not personal, but who else got these letters? He almost asked, but stopped. Judging by their averted eyes, everyone else feared the board more than him. That's it. Meeting adjourned, Mrs. Stark announced, the finality in her tone leaving no room for argument. Alan turned to leave, the taste of humiliation bitter, when a slip of paper fluttered from Mrs. Lee's lap. Quickly, almost apologetically, she slid it toward him. Call me tonight, there's more you should know. He slipped it into his pocket, heart hammering new patterns against his ribs. Something in Mrs. Lee's eyes, fear and defiance, fighting for space, spoke volumes. As he stepped outside, the lights flickered and wind pressed cold against his back. He thought of Emily painting in front of the window, unaware. He thought of the words, not personal, echoing in every corner of the meeting hall. But as he reached his car, heart pounding, a question burned so bright it blotted out everything else. What exactly did Mrs. Lee know? And why hadn't anyone spoken up before? The car interior felt like a pressure cooker as Alan sat, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, staring at the trembling note. Call me tonight. There's more you should know. Twice, he dialed Mrs. Lee's number and chickened out before the call could go through. His pride warred with curiosity, but suspicion, that cold, electrifying edge, finally won. He pressed the button. Mrs. Lee answered on the third ring, voice quick and low. Alan, I'm glad you called. He exhaled, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. What's going on? Why did you... At the meeting, it was like everyone was scared to move. There was a heavy pause, as if Mrs. Lee looked over her shoulder from a safe distance. They are scared. Why? Alan pressed. It's just a mailbox and a painting. This is insane. You're not the only one getting these letters, she said, her tone almost a whisper. They pick 1 or 2 people each year, usually single homeowners, divorced, older, anyone less likely to fight back. Alan sat back, horror dawning. What for? Some kind of lesson? Or... It's not just about control, Mrs. Lee continued. There's money involved. The fines go into a discretionary fund. The board can approve how it's spent as long as it's listed as community improvement. But the records aren't clear. A lot gets buried. Alan's mind reeled back through every threat, every form letter. He remembered reading about a new community fence last summer that never materialized. He closed his eyes, fighting the urge to shout. You think they're running a slush fund? Mrs. Lee hesitated. No one's caught them. But people leave instead of fighting. Houses go up for sale in the dead of night. Nobody asks questions. When you push back, the fines keep coming. Or they threaten court. No one wants to lose their house over a mailbox. He remembered Mr. Klein's haunted glance, the way Mrs. Collins never waved anymore. Why me? Is it because I pushed back? Partly. Her voice fell even quieter. It's also about control. If someone's new or doesn't have family, easier to make an example. Alan's pulse thudded so loud he could hardly hear his own words. What about the rest of the board? Do they know what she's doing? Another hush. Some do. Some are just scared. Mrs. Taylor, her nephew, got his first job from Layla. Most stay on her good side. But if you dig, Alan, be careful. It gets ugly fast. Alan's fingers drummed the steering wheel. A low, urgent confession spilled. They called me in last year over a planter for strawberries. David, my husband, wanted to fight. The letters doubled in a month. We gave up, paid the fines to keep the peace. You can't win. Alan gazed through the fogged windshield, watching light burn from windows in 1,000 silent homes. Maybe you can't win, he thought. Or maybe if the right people cared enough, you could. He asked, do you have proof, something that would make them back off? She sounded uncertain. Maybe a file, some receipts. But if they find out I gave you anything, the weight of that fear crept through the line. Alan sensed the risk ran deeper than he realized. Send me what you can, something small to start. I won't move without you. She agreed, then ended the call abruptly. My husband just pulled in. Be careful, Alan. Silence filled the car, but Alan lay there breathless, adrenaline fizzing beneath his skin. He walked back into his own home, Emily already asleep. He tucked her in, feeling the hope and dread twist together with every gentle brush of her hair. On the kitchen table, the stack of HOA letters stood crooked, almost mocking. Alan wrote one word in his notebook, pressing the pen deep. Retaliate. Outside, Willow Creek lay still, the light glinting off regulation mailboxes and silent windows. He wondered, if Mrs. Stark could bend the rules to hurt him, how far was Alan willing to go to set things right? He set his alarm for early morning, a new purpose gnawing at the hollowness in his chest. If injustice hid in plain sight, wasn't it time someone finally called it out? Alan didn't sleep. He lay restless, counting each hour's passing, thinking of letters and ledgers, the quiet terror in Mrs. Lee's voice. He rose before dawn, moving on autopilot, shower, black coffee, listlessly buttering toast he never ate. Emily patted in, blurry-eyed. Not even she could pierce his haze. Dad, you're up early. He forced a smile. Lots to do, kiddo. When Emily left for school, Alan pulled out that battered notebook. He began a list. Violations, fines, dates. He added neighbors' names. Mrs. Lee, Mr. Klein, even Mrs. Collins, who always paid her dues early and still got warnings about trash bins. His mind snapped from memory to memory, seeing the pieces begin to align. He spent the morning searching the county clerk's office website, digging for HOA financial records. Most were redacted, expenses labeled as community improvement, equipment, or miscellaneous legal. One expense flagged his attention, a $7,000 0 cents general repair paid in August last year. He couldn't recall anything being fixed. His phone pinged, a text from a block number, photo of a scanned receipt time-stamped 6 months ago, a gardening supply store, $189.87, billed to Willow Creek HOA. Discretionary, the handwriting on the signature line was a flourish he recognized from every one of Mrs. Stark's letters. No new plantings ever appeared in the communal gardens that winter. Another file arrived, a spreadsheet showing incoming fines from various residents. Almost 30 in a year, always the same handful of names, always minor infractions. $3,250, 0 cents in administrative penalties. A windfall for miscellaneous projects. Alan's heart slammed against his chest. Proof. He called Mrs. Lee, who picked up after 2 short rings. I sent what I could, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Delete it after. Please be careful. Thank you, Alan replied, but I can't do this alone. A silence stretched. Then she sighed. I'll talk to Mr. Klein. He's kept receipts too. Careful, though. Lila will notice if people start asking questions. I know, Alan said, the words stuck in his throat, thick with dread. That night, he scrolled through the messages again, pulse racing, eyes burning. He dreamt of Mrs. Stark standing at the end of his driveway, pen poised, ready to write him out of his own life. The next morning, the sharp clang of the mailbox startled him. A new letter, another warning, trash bin lid not fully secured. He looked up and caught Mrs. Stark jogging, her gaze fixed on his house. Alan stared her down, forcing a brittle smile, but inside, a storm gathered. They were watching him, waiting. But this time, Alan realized he had something they didn't. The truth. He almost chuckled, almost at the absurdity of it all. Because what Mrs. Stark and her board didn't know yet, what even Mrs. Lee could scarcely believe, was that Alan didn't intend to run, and he was going to fight. And his first step? Attend the next volunteer day, the one Mrs. Stark insisted improved community spirit, the one that placed her in the perfect position, too busy to watch everyone at once. Would anyone else there dare to spill what they knew? Or would Alan again be standing by himself? Saturday dawned bright, the scent of fresh mulch heavy in the thin morning air. Willow Creek's volunteer day where community members unite for a better neighborhood. Alan donned his oldest jeans and a faded t-shirt, the kind Mrs. Stark would surely consider an infraction if she could. He slathered sunscreen over his arms, stuffing a small digital recorder in his pocket, just in case. He arrived at the clubhouse yard by 8 a.m., where a gaggle of residents clustered around Mrs. Stark. She wore a crisp polo embroidered with the HOA logo and oversized sunglasses, clipboard at the ready. "Good morning, everyone," she called, her voice slicing the lazy chatter. "Let's pair up. Mr. Fisher with Mr. Klein, please. Lawn bags in the shed. We'll start by the mailbox clusters." Ellen nodded, eyes darting to Mr. Klein, a slight, graying man with a nervous smile. As they gathered rakes and bags, Klein mumbled, "Did you get more letters?" Alan tipped his head, murmuring, "3 this month. I know what's going on. A few of us do." Klein's face darkened. "I have every notice. 4 years' worth. You know we paid nearly $400, 0 cents in fines for nighttime watering last summer." Ellen gripped the rake harder. "They're targeting people who seem vulnerable. I talked to Mrs. Lee. She sent me receipts." Klein's eyes widened. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "If you push, Lila finds a way to make it worse. Last winter, my cousin tried to run for the board. They announced he had outstanding dues. Total lie. He dropped out." The volunteers moved through the morning, raking, bagging leaves, trimming hedges to approved heights. Mrs. Stark surveyed everything. Her smile never reached her eyes. In an alley beside the tool shed, Alan whispered, "If enough of us come forward, they can't ignore it. But I need backup, documents, complaints, anything." Klein considered. "Meet me tomorrow. My garage after sundown. I'll bring everything. I'll ask Collins and Lee, but Lila can't know." Alan agreed, heart finally pounding with hope instead of resignation. Across the way, Mrs. Stark locked eyes with Alan. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of suspicion. Alan forced himself to wave as if nothing were amiss. He spent the afternoon elbow-deep in community, never letting his guard slip. He caught whispers in the hedges, exchanged quick looks with anyone who dared sympathize. By midday, Mrs. Stark had announced, "Excellent work! We're all making Willow Creek shine." Alan nodded blandly, feeling the lie tighten its grip. When the last hedge was trimmed and the tools returned, Alan drifted home. At his mailbox, he found not a letter, but a single white carnation taped to the lid. No note, calling card, or a warning. He walked the street, knowing Mrs. Stark's windows faced this direction. His skin prickled. Alan opened his hand, crushing the flower's delicate stem. Tomorrow, he'd walk into Klein's garage with 3 others who actually cared. But it wasn't just the HOA's gaze he would need to fear, because suspicion in Willow Creek didn't end at the edge of a clipboard. Alan barely made it through. Sunday, he spent the bright part of the day shuffling around his house, deadheading wilted marigolds, trying not to let his nervous energy spill over when Emily returned from her mom's. He busied himself with her homework, the kitchen radio humming soft static in the background. At dinner, Emily giggled about Muffin Day, but Alan's half-smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She looked at him, concern shadowing her young features, but didn't ask. When dusk finally swallowed up the edges of the neighborhood, Alan made his way to Mr. Klein's garage. The door was open just a crack, not enough to be obvious, but enough to signal trust. Alan slipped inside, and the hazy glow of a single bulb painted long shadows across potting soil, old tools, a battered workbench. Mrs. Lee was already waiting, arms crossed, tapping her foot. Mrs. Collins arrived moments later, clutching a manila folder to her chest. Klein locked the door behind Alan, peering out through the window before drawing the blinds. The air in the garage felt thick, charged by the sense that what they were doing was somehow dangerous. Alan greeted them quietly, conscious of every sound. Mr. Klein unpacked a stack of notices from a shoebox. Here's every violation. Most years they double in spring when nobody wants to fight. Mrs. Lee handed Alan printouts, Word documents, and spreadsheets detailing fines, all dated and annotated. I've double-checked these amounts against the bank records, she added. Numbers don't add up. Mrs. Collins opened her folder, revealing invoices for maintenance work, all billed to the discretionary fund, down payments for projects that never happened. I took these from the community mailbox one afternoon. Meant to toss them, but I've always wondered. For 2 hours, they traded stories. Empty threats, door-to-door inspections, the unnerving way Mrs. Stark seemed to know when someone complained. Ellen recorded key parts, asking each for permission. What about the rest of the board? Alan asked. Will anyone else listen? Klein shook his head. Dalka is in Lila's pocket. Taylor hates conflict. You'd have to get every homeowner to sign a vote to dissolve the board or at least get Lila out. Nobody's tried. The silence that followed was broken by Mrs. Collins, her voice trembling. I'll sign. I'll tell my husband. We can't keep living under her thumb. Ellen felt a flicker, hope raw and real, warring with fear. Me too, Mrs. Lee agreed, but we have to be smart. If she thinks we're organizing, she'll act fast. Ellen nodded. Tomorrow I'll take this to the county, find a lawyer, someone outside Willow Creek. If we get a formal complaint on file, they can't brush it away this time. The conversation became a pact, sealed more by determination than trust. Each agreed to reach out to one trusted neighbor. If enough joined, the pattern would collapse under its own weight. Alan tucked the evidence inside his jacket, the files pressed cold against his heart. They parted quietly, each slipping home beneath a heavy sky. Alan looked back once before leaving, the garage's thin window spilling one last sliver of light. He saw Mrs. Lee standing inside, shoulders squared as if daring the dark to try anything. Alan didn't sleep that night, but it was the first time his insomnia felt anchored in purpose. Because now, if Mrs. Stark struck again, she wouldn't be facing one isolated homeowner. She'd be facing a resistance. But what he didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that she was watching, waiting, and already planning her countermove. Now, by Monday morning, the usual script of Alan's life was replaced by a sense of stealthy rebellion. He felt every look, every driveway wave as potentially part of something bigger, either an ally or a spy. While Emily munched her cereal, Alan double-checked his folder. A mosaic of HOA notices, fake invoices, and annotated spreadsheets. He slipped everything into his canvas messenger bag, careful to keep it closed, heart thumping as if carrying contraband. He dropped Emily at school and drove straight to the county offices, parking far from the main entrance just in case Mrs. Stark or anyone else decided to run errands in that direction today. Inside, the hum of bureaucracy soothed him. Clerks stamping documents, the low whir of printers. He approached a glassed-in counter labeled Community Complaints and Nonprofit Oversight. A woman in her 60s looked up, eyebrow raised. I'd like to file a formal complaint against my HOA. There's evidence of financial misconduct, he said, voice barely above the hum of the copier. She slid a form his way. Statement of allegation. Fill it out, attach proof. We'll assign an investigator in a few days. Mr. Fisher, Alan Fisher. He started writing, listing dates, details, the names of others who experienced the same pattern of fines and intimidation. He stapled photocopies of every document. When he finished, the clerk took everything and offered a rare, conspiratorial smile. You're not the first, you know. Most people get tired and quit. Ellen met her gaze. Maybe, but not this time. He left with 2 stamped copies, one for his files, one for his lawyer if he could find one. On the way home, Alan stopped at a strip mall cafe and searched HOA lawyer whistleblower on his phone. He dialed the top hit, heart in his throat. To his utter relief, a bright and brisk voice answered, "A class action possible, but you'll need more signatures. And whatever you do, keep your evidence hidden. If the board finds out, they could call a special meeting and try to push you out." Alan hung up, nerves taut. The clerk's words echoed, "Most get tired and quit." At home, a new letter awaited. This time, the language had changed. Cease and desist, further slander of the Willow Creek Board, legal measures may be pursued. Alan scanned the street for Mrs. Stark, but saw only a vague silhouette behind curtain lace in her front window, watching him, always watching. He called Mrs. Lee on a burner Google account, sharing the latest threat. "They know," she whispered. "Lila will come after all of us." Alan felt resolve snap into place. "We stay quiet for now. No emails or calls, only in person. Can you get at least 5 more on board for a petition?" She hesitated, but agreed. "We'll try, but hurry." Monday night, Emily asked, "Dad, why do you look so serious?" He wanted to lie, but didn't, because sometimes Emmy people with power break the rules and don't want to get caught. "But I'm not giving up." She nodded, small and solemn, her arms looping around his neck. That hug lingered with Alan long after she drifted to sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the latest letter curling at the edges on his nightstand. What would Mrs. Stark try next to protect herself? Would the county act before she struck again? Outside, clouds gathered heavy over Willow Creek, promising a storm. And in the dark, Alan wondered, what if even this wasn't enough? The next day broke with a stinging chill and winds that rattled loose gutters. Alan awoke to the sound of distant sirens, a faint warning note beneath the usual hum of the neighborhood. He made coffee, barely registering the taste, and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from a private number, a voicemail he didn't want to hear. He steeled himself and pressed play. "Mr. Fisher, this is Lila Stark. I am formally advising you to cease all actions that could be construed as defamation, conspiracy, or harassment of the Willow Creek Board. Be advised that further communication may require legal escalation." Alan deleted the message, pulse pounding. There it was, her pivot from veiled threats to outright intimidation. He called in sick to work and set about his day gathering more signatures. In sly, cautious bursts, Alan moved house to house. Klein signed quickly, eyes darting. Mrs. Collins hugged him, her hands shook. 3 others, Mr. Shaw, a kindly widower, the Browns, parents of twin toddlers, signed too, voice trembling as they talked about threats from Mrs. Stark. Word must have gotten out because at one house, the door didn't open at all. He saw blinds twitch, a silent refusal. By afternoon, 6 more signatures joined the cause. 4 others promised to think but clearly feared reprisal. He walked every inch of Willow Creek's winding drives, under the wary gaze of mailboxes, flagged by their color for passive defiance. At dusk, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Lee. "Heard Lila called a special board meeting tomorrow, agenda unspecified. Be careful, she knows you're not backing down." Ellen stared at the glowing screen. Of course she did. An icy drizzle began to coat the windows. Alan stood at the front window, watching Mrs. Stark's porch light blink on. Would she try to expel him, sue him, retaliate against anyone suspected of helping? Without enough votes, their effort could stall before it began. That night, sleep eluded him. He rose 3 times to check locks, sitting at the kitchen table with the petition laid out before him. He stared at the list of signatures. Not enough, not yet, every name a risk. He thought of what might come, the meetings, the letters, even the threat of legal action. But for each worry, Alan saw the fear start to shift. If Mrs. Stark had called a board meeting gunning for him, maybe, for once, she was the one on defense. You try to rest, mine alive with possibilities. But when the morning came, it was not Mrs. Stark's next threat that would rock the neighborhood. It was the arrival of someone outside Willow Creek, someone with questions Lila could never quite answer. Wednesday morning, Alan opened the door to a sharp rap just after sunrise, expecting another warning notice, another neighbor keeping their eyes down. Instead, he found a tall woman in a long gray coat, badge flashing at her hip. Mr. Fisher, Clara Jensen, county investigator, mind if I come in? His surprise gave way to relief, then wariness. He offered coffee. She refused. Instead, she set her briefcase on the table, removed a notepad, and glanced around the kitchen with a practiced eye. I've reviewed your complaint. Thank you for being thorough. I also spoke to Mrs. Lee and Mr. Klein. I want to see the original documents, every fine, every receipt. Alan produced the box, Rita carefully laying notices on the table one by one. He snapped photos, marked patterns. It appears these letters aren't just about code compliance, evidence of selective targeting, escalation of fines, misallocated funds. She looked up. Has Mrs. Stark ever threatened you with legal action? Alan nodded, explaining about the voicemails, the warnings, the forced isolation. Clara's eyes sharpened. You're not alone, you know. We've had reports from other communities in the past 2 years. Smaller scale, but always the same playbook. Concentrated power, discretionary spending, secret meetings. Alan's confidence grew with every question she asked. They spent nearly 2 hours reviewing records, making detailed notes. Finally, Clara said, I'll be at the board meeting tonight. I want you and your neighbors as witnesses. If Lila threatens anyone, you record it. If she proposes sudden changes to the charter, stall. I want to ask questions on the record. Understand? He nodded, a knot in his chest unwinding, if only slightly. After she left, Alan called Mrs. Lee and Klein, relaying the instructions. If she tries to shut us down, we're not alone. County's on it. But even as hope tingled, Alan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Mrs. Stark might still find a way to slip past them. She had for years. That evening, Alan dressed in his best shirt and coat, the box of files under his arm. He kissed Emily on the forehead and told her for the first time, wish me luck tonight, kiddo. We might just make the neighborhood a fair place again. Emily hugged him tightly. You can do it, Dad. Alan smiled, letting her confidence bolster his own. He walked toward the rec hall, joined by Klein, Collins, Mrs. Lee, and a half-dozen others with faces set in quiet determination. Inside, the board meeting waited. Mrs. Stark front and center, smiling as if nothing was at stake. But behind that smile, Alan noticed her hands trembling ever so slightly. Just before the meeting began, Clara Jensen entered, her badge gleaming in the fluorescent light. Alan's pulse quickened. Tonight, everything would change. But the question burned all the brighter. Would it be enough? The meeting room buzzed with nervous whispering. As Alan took his seat up front, a box of evidence settled beside him. He scanned the crowd for familiar faces. Friends. Doubters. And at the head of it all, Mrs. Stark, who looked the same as ever. But the eyes of the neighborhood were on her in a new way. Probing, wary, braced for trouble. Mrs. Stark called the meeting to order, voice sharp as glass. Item 1, ongoing noncompliance and threats to our neighborhood stability. Mr. Fisher has requested to speak. You have 5 minutes. Ellen stood, chest tight. I want the record to show there are multiple homeowners here with similar complaints. We have documentation of selective enforcement and possible misuse of HOA funds. And I'd like to introduce Clara Jensen, county investigator. She's here to observe. All at once, the room felt colder. Mrs. Stark's forced smile froze in place. Since when does county government interfere with voluntary associations? She protested. Clara stepped forward, voice calm but commanding. I'm here regarding multiple formal complaints and the fiduciary duties of nonprofit boards. Behind Alan, neighbors murmured fear, relief, awe mixing. Alan read aloud the evidence. Threatening letters, fabricated infractions, receipts and invoices for never completed improvements. Mrs. Collins followed, her voice shaking, reading her own stack of warnings. Klein and Lee corroborated their stories. The board responded in rehearsed unison, claims of misunderstandings and logistical errors. Mrs. Taylor insisted the board distributed notices impartially. Del Ka tried to deflect, blaming overzealous volunteers. But Clara pressed harder. Have you ever selectively distributed fines? Has discretionary spending ever been used for non-communal benefit? Mrs. Stark wavered, lashes fluttering. She tried to steer the agenda. Let's move to new business, she commanded, desperate for any distraction. But Alan, and now at last several others, stood their ground. Mrs. Lee interrupted. We have more signatures and a petition to remove Mrs. Stark as board president until these claims are investigated. An audible gasp rippled through the room. Stark's mask of composure shattered, voice warping with anger. You're all being misled. This is an attack, not a real complaint. But now neighbors raised their hands, volunteering stories. One by one, a dozen voices joined. The Browns described their own threats. So did Mr. Shaw. Panic flashed in Stark's eyes. She tried to gavel the meeting closed, but Clara cut in smoothly. Copies of these records will be retained by the county. Any attempt to destroy evidence or retaliate will be viewed as obstruction. The balance of power shifted. Stark's allies shrank away. Taylor sat rigid, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Alan looked around, heart racing after all this time it was happening. Finally, the mask was cracking. But as the meeting dissolved into anxious chaos, as the board tried to call an executive session and Alan's neighbors clustered together, Alan knew this wasn't nearly over. The county would investigate. Stark would likely fight, perhaps threaten lawsuits. There would be fallout, fear, anger, old wounds reopened. But now at least the silence was broken. Alan squeezed Klein's shoulder. We did it, or started it anyway. Across the room, Mrs. Stark glared back, her eyes dark with promises not yet spoken. Alan sensed chillingly that the board president still had cards to play. And in Willow Creek, the game had never been fair. The next few weeks blurred as the investigation unfolded in slow motion. County officials swarmed the HOA office, pulling files and hard drives. Alan was summoned twice for interviews. So were Collins, Klein, and half the others who'd signed the petition. Mrs. Stark remained visible, stalking the sidewalks, taking notes, whispering to anyone who looked uncertain. Her smile had become a weapon, all teeth and warning. Rumors spread about lawsuits, about blacklists, even about vandalism to troublemakers' cars. Neighbors divided into camps. Some thanked Alan, bringing him home baked bread and shy confessions. We never dared speak up before. Others turned away at the curb, worried their own names might next appear on a warning letter. Alan protected his daughter even more fiercely. He walked her to class every morning, heart leaping at the sight of an unfamiliar car parked nearby. He scanned his porch for cameras or other subtle warnings. One day, a red envelope appeared, a lawyer's letter addressed to Alan Fisher. It threatened a civil claim for damages incurred by public slander. Alan handed it to his own attorney, who brushed it off. Textbook scare tactic. You have the county's protection now. They won't risk open retaliation. Still, anxiety ate at Alan's sleep, left his appetite hollowed. Some nights, he woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel, the sense of a presence watching from the dark. And yet, good things began to bloom. Klein started a weekly walk and talk for neighbors afraid to speak out alone. Mrs. Lee became de facto organizer for a new neighborhood fairness committee, drafting a new clear code of conduct and proposing real oversight of HOA funds. A sense of community finally began to take shape, the old lines of fear replaced, if haltingly, with cautious trust. Emily painted a new picture, one Alan now framed proudly on his living room wall. A splash of bright handprints beneath a sun, our home painted at the bottom. As he admired it, a knock came at the door. Clara Jensen, smiling not as an investigator but as a friend, handed Alan a stack of papers. The county is recommending criminal charges for Stark and Delka misappropriation, intimidation, and obstruction. They'll appoint a receiver to clean up the mess. You did it, Alan. Alan felt warmth gather under his ribs, the hollowness at last replaced with hope. He thanked Clara, they shook hands, and she pressed a business card into his palm. If anyone tries to frighten you, call me. Later that night, Klein, Collins, and Lee gathered in Alan's backyard. Lanterns glowed, beers were opened, laughter, real laughter, spilled into the sweet spring air. For the first time, Alan looked around and saw not a fortress under siege, but a home surrounded by people worth fighting for. Yet through the laughter, Alan glimpsed one final warning. Mrs. Stark's house was dark, her car gone. No police, no board meeting, no apology. Yet, what revenge might she dream up in the silence of her empty house? Was this truly over? Or was Willow Creek simply taking a breath before the next storm? 1 month after the meeting, Alan awoke to rays of sun falling, gentle and soft, through his window. The neighborhood, once tight with dread, now buzzed with new energy. Lawns untangled, children's art in windows, people on porches sharing smiles not just out of obligation, but genuine relief. But tension still lingered, a ghost refusing to be chased out completely. Today, Alan walked the block with Emily, her hands sticky with jam. Neighbors waved, some shy, others bold, but all less encumbered by fear. They paused at the corner where a for sale sign now stood in Mrs. Stark's once imposing yard. Her house, once a hub of power, stood quiet, curtains drawn, the mailbox sagging unadorned. Rumor had it she'd skipped town, legal action pending, license under review. Some pitied her, others silently cheered. The board, under temporary leadership, held open meetings. No more threats, no more secret fines, and every expenditure publicly posted. Alan's own case was nearly closed. The petition for fair HOA elections now a reality. Neighbors voted, more than ever before. Oversight committees formed. New rules, written together and not from fear, gained approval. Alan walked home, lighter than he had in years, Emily skipping ahead, her laughter no longer muffled by caution. But as he opened the battered, stubbornly black mailbox, a folded note waited inside. No letterhead, no threats, no fines, just a sheet of paper, 3 words scribbled in a tight, shaky scrawl. Nice try, more soon. Alan stared at the words, the ink smudged as if written in haste or anger. He looked around, nothing but silence, birdsong, the faint sighing of the wind. His gut twisted, not with fear this time, but with grim certainty. Justice wasn't permanent. Decay always crept in. But this time, Alan wasn't alone. This time, hope had neighbors. He tacked the note away, returned inside, and after a pause, hung Emily's latest painting in the kitchen window for all of Willow Creek to see. Because in the end, maybe it wasn't about perfect order at all. Maybe it was just about standing up every time the dark tried to move in and daring it to try again. If this story moved you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories where justice, courage, and community collide. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment where the little guy stands tall. We'll see you in the next one.